So if you happen to watch Andrew Mahone's Tricky Gym live stream of the GLC tournament on Thursday, April 16th, this was the Full Grip Games League night, you may have overheard a conversation that started that went really far about Mahone considering changing the rules of GLC and modifying the monotype rules to allow mixed types so that we could have Pokemon that normally can't evolve in GLC because there are split evolution lines.
Now, we could always just change the rules of Gym Leader Challenge to allow for pre-evolutions. I mean, we could just do that. You know, it's our format. We can party however we want to.
This was mind-blowing to me, but he seems to be really interested in it. So it kind of got me thinking, like, what would that look like? If we could play Pokemon that evolve into their types for that type in your deck, what would that give us? And I was trying to think, what is the simplest way to allow this to work? And for me, I know there's a lot of people coming up with a lot of different ideas, but for me, what makes the most sense in terms of staying accessible, not being too complicated, not having a whole list of like Pokemon that are allowed and not allowed and things that are allowed, like all these special conditions, just make it one sentence that's really easy for people to understand. The final Pokemon in each evolution line in your deck must have the same type. Okay, right? So that means that if you've got just a big basic in your deck that doesn't evolve, has to match your deck's type. If you've got a stage 1 that doesn't evolve into a stage 2, the stage 1 has to match your deck's type, but the basic that it evolves from could be any type. And then so on for stage 2s. You've got a stage 2 in your deck, it has to match the types of all the other final evolutions in your deck, but the stage 1 and the basic that it evolves from could be any type. A lot of people are calling this the Eevee rule. This is something that people do as a house rule for their GLC leagues and stuff, just so that you can play Evolutions, because those are super popular. Being able to play Steelix in metal decks, being able to play Tyranitar in darkness decks. These Pokemon are really iconic, but they're so hard to play in the types that they're iconic for. So for this video, I want to take a look at every off-type evolution. I'm going to actually try and go through all of them. I think I found all of them. I may have missed one or two, but I'm going to go through all of them. There's a lot of bad ones. There's a lot of good ones, and also there's the implication of not only what new evolution lines can we actually run in types that weren't allowed, but does that allow broken things to then happen with mixing pre-evolutions with abilities into types that couldn't play them. The most common one people talk about, having trade Curlia in fighting. Is that a problem? I want to see what that looks like. So I'm going to go through it, and I'm going to start off with the Eevees, because I think that's the one that people are most interested in, and I don't want them to just get lost in the types. So I'm going to start off with the Eevees, and then I'm going to go through it type by type, starting from the most interesting type in my opinion, and then going to, at the end, I'm going to talk about the two most problematic types that it seems to be causing problems is fighting getting things that we probably don't want them to have, and psychic getting some things that we probably don't want that type to be having. So let's start off with the Eevee here. All right, so switching over to the card view here. So I'm going to start off with Eevee, and it's important to remember there's two Eevees that probably are the best ones. We've got the boosted evolution one, so that's the one where if it's in your active, you can evolve it on the first turn or the turn you play it. So super powerful ability. And another similar ability of energy evolution. When you attach an energy to it, if it's basic energy, you can search your deck for evolution that matches that energy type and put it on the Eevee to evolve it. And that also bypasses first turn evolving restriction. So both of these can evolve on the first turn, going first or going second to attack, which is really good. I think the main reasons to play one over the other is, the boosted evolution one, you just need to have the evolution in your hand. The energy evolution one, you have to have an energy that matches the type you're going to play, and it has to be in your deck. So if you've got the evolution in your hand with the energy evolution one in play, you can't evolve it first turn. But keeping that in mind, we're going to look at, so there's a lot of evolutions that are really bad. Frankly, there aren't really any good Espeons. You can see the relevant ones here on the screen. Same thing for Flareon, nothing really relevant. For GLC, that would be powerful enough to see play. Leafeon, just not good enough. Vaporeon, not good enough. There's just nothing worth playing. Now we get into some interesting stuff with Glaceon in water. We've got one that does, for 1 energy, you put a 30 it does 30 damage, and then if they don't switch, they take 9 damage counters on the defending Pokemon. So effectively 120 on their active if they don't switch. Now with that instant evolving Eevee, I think that could be really interesting and put a lot of pressure on the opponent in the early game, but I think it's still kind of not super powerful. The other one that matters, we've got this one, that Frost Wall, that prevents all damage from evolution Pokemon. Super interesting, but I think you really want to be preventing damage from basic Pokemon is the one you want to see, since big basics are your main attackers in GLC. Still interesting. And then Blizzard, for 1 energy, does 30 damage, and it does 10 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So Water Spread would really like that, I think, especially since you can evolve and attack with it on the first turn going second. And then Fairy will get some new types. I think this is the most exciting thing about this, is Fairy, for the first time in years, will actually get access to some new types. They're not good, or new Pokemon. They're not good because they're still from the X and Y era and earlier, but Fairy would get access to the Sylveon now, which looks, actually both of them look pretty good. There's 2 Sylveons, both look pretty decent for control. One of them, you force the opponent to reveal their hand to discard a supporter, and you get to use that supporter's effect. The other one is you get to move an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon to one of their bench Pokemon, so a really effective form of energy removal. For Darkness, we've got 2 Umbreons that are relevant. We've got a 1 energy Umbreon. Now this one doesn't benefit very much from getting to evolve on the first turn, but 1 energy for 120 on Retaliate. It's decent, not great, honestly. Actually, I think you want Retaliate to do more, but 120 for 1 energy is worth mentioning. And then the second one, actually, I think is more relevant. If you can go first and attack with this on the first turn, Feint Attack doing 50 damage, snipe to one of your opponent's Pokemon, bench Pokemon. I mean, there's still decks that play 50 HP basics, Psychic being among them. And it's got a pretty decent second attack to follow up with the 140 for 3 energies, not bad. And then Jolteon's got some interesting ones. Well, okay, never mind. They're still pretty bad. Probably the most solid one is 160 for 3 energy. That's decent. You know, you could. That's like mid-standard par for the course. This one's funny. The one that says if you have a memory capsule attached, it turns off all water Pokemon's abilities. I just thought that was funny because you would totally screw over a water deck if you played that, but only a water deck. And you're already hitting them for weakness. But then there's this Jolteon that says if this Jolteon is active, when your opponent attaches energy from their hand to one of their Pokemon, you put 2 damage on that Pokemon. That is a archetype that I am aware of being in Lightning, where attaching energy deals damage to your opponent's Pokemon, and then you do spread damage from there to capitalize. There's several other Pokemon that have an ability like that, so you could get that up first turn going first with that Eevee. That could be pretty interesting. And that's it for the EVs. So we're going to go back because I want to talk about starting with Metal. So Metal would gain access to Scizor because currently there's no grass type Scizor, so we can't even play Scizor in GLC. And they would definitely probably be playing this one. We see this type of effect being used in other types. Darkness has Weavile that does this. Dragon has used Flapple in the past. 50 damage for each of your opponent's Pokemon that has an ability. Plus you get a bonus 10 damage and it only costs 1 metal energy. Super powerful attack. Generally, you're going to be doing 160. Sometimes you miss the attack if your opponent is aware of it, but usually most decks are putting 3 abilities on the field at the time on average. So this is a very strong attacker that Metal would gain access to. Another fun one, this Scizor 3 colorless does 80 plus 80 more if there's a basic Pokemon. So you get a nice big basic assassin here, hunts down big basic Pokemon. 3 colorless, so you can power it up with a triple acceleration or ignition energy as well. So that's a fun option. Also, in my opinion, has the best art of any of the non-full art Scizors. And then we talked about Steelix, and unfortunately, I think the only good Steelix is not that great, and it's this one. 130 damage for 1 energy, and it's an Earthquake attack, so it does 30 damage to each of your bench Pokemon. But it has 180 HP on a stage 1, so that's great. We've seen this used in Fire, has used this with the Scentiscorch, and now we're seeing it being used with Diggersby in colorless. So could see play. 130 for 1 energy is good, but you're gonna have to modify it. Doesn't hit Iron Boulder for weakness, so you would have to be able to modify it, and then you'd have to find a way to turn that damage into a benefit somehow. But that is probably the best Steelix you'll see. Now here's a really exciting one, Hop's Corviknight in metal. Couldn't play it because the previous evolutions are colorless, but for 50 damage for 1 colorless energy and you snipe 50, this thing would be insane as a stage 2 in metal decks. With the Hop's Choice Band, you're doing 80 damage to the active and 50 to the bench, and then you got the Steel Wing, which would be doing for 2 metal plus the Choice Band 180 damage, and you're taking 60 less damage. This thing would be a monster in metal, and I think that would be really cool to see metal get this as a stage 2 attacker, because normally stage 2 attackers have to have a really good ability on the middle stage or just be really busted, and I think this one is quite busted and would actually see play. Now, interestingly, metal would get access to an ancient trait that they didn't have before. Excadrill only evolved from the fighting type Drillbur and has the Omega Barrage ancient trait. Oh, interesting. You can use Dredge twice, so you could get 4 energy onto this thing with that Dredge. Oh, I see what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to use Dredge, and then you can use Mock Claw. That's kind of interesting. So you could actually power this thing up with Dredge, and then you could attack with something like TM Turbo or TM Blindside or TM Crisis Punch off of 1 energy. That's actually really cool. I hadn't realized you could do that. But if you could power it up, you can actually hit twice with those as well, which is what you see with these Omega Barrage Pokemon. So really cool option that would come from Excadrill. Also, if you play the Drillbur that mills energy, you can fill up your discard pile for things like Bronzong. There's a regular Corviknight here that does 200 for 3, which is pretty good on a stage 2. It's okay, but the Accelerate is actually the same as the Marshadow's Shadow Kick attack. So if you knock out a Pokemon for 50 damage or for 1 energy, you don't take any damage or effects during the next turn. And I know that metal hits both water and psychic for weakness, so you could do some decent damage with this against like a psychic or water deck if you can boss up their weakness Pokemon on the bench and be invincible and go up on prizes. So that's a cool stage 2. There's also an Empoleon that has a total command. This is okay, very mid honestly, because there's no good Primplups, although there is a Prinplup in water that can hit 70 damage snipe for 3 colorless energy, so you could use that with just metal energy, so that's cool. Some other things, Escavalier has a couple of decent, these would be good in like light metal, I guess. The light metal is that aggro metal deck that uses very cheap 1 energy attacks, while Lance's 90 damage for 1 energy or 120 for 2 energy kind of fits that bill. Fortress is interesting because it would give metal something to add to like a spread strategy. Currently there's not much of a spread strategy available in metal, but I think Fortress would be kind of cool with that ability that when you play it, it does 10 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon, and then you can like scoop up spam and do stuff like that. Not super powerful, but it's also interesting that Fortress hasn't been playable in GLC because Pineco is only grass. And then we've got a Goldengo, does 120 for 1 energy if it evolves at a turn. So very similar to Misty Starmie. Again, another candidate to go into light metal. I think light metal gets some boosts. There's a bunch of Solgaleos. I don't think any of them are particularly good for stage 2. There's a Wormadam that, again, I don't think... Actually, Wormadam is kind of interesting. Does 20 damage time, no damage to this Pokemon. So you could use that with the Steelix. That's kind of funny. You could Earthquake with the Steelix. If you hit it 3 times with Earthquake, now it's doing 180 damage for 1 metal energy, assuming you don't get pinged to death. So that's kind of neat. There's a Wormadam you could play. And then Probopass, I think is the last one, does damage equal to the retreat cost on the opponent's active Pokemon. So if you could go with like Galarian Mine plus Gravity Stone for, what is that, 30, 90, that's like 100 damage, plus whatever your opponent's active Pokemon has, so maybe 160 for 1 metal energy. Seems inconsistent, but an interesting option. Again, I wanted to just go through all the options, so this way you guys can see all the options as well. Now, Darkness, I think a lot of people know about this. Tyranitar has been unplayable in Darkness because the Pupitar and the Larvitar are fighting type. We did get Grimsley's move to help with that, but it's turned out, I think most people are finding it's just so inconsistent to try and get it out that way. But now you could get out the Larvitar, rare candy it, or get it out with a Pupitar and get that item lock going and have that really powerful 2 energy attacker for 150. There's also another Tyranitar that's worth mentioning. 2 energy for 230. Not bad, especially with Toxtricity. You can power this up in 1 turn, and you're knocking out an Okidogi in 1 shot with this for 2 energy. Plus, we're just a Muscle Band or some other damage. Just 10 more damage, you're knocking out a Wailord. And then the route actually can do some damage too. If your opponent has a full bench, right, you're doing 180 for 1 energy. So this Tyranitar is actually worth mentioning. It's just, I think the item lock one is probably just a little bit stronger. Now, interesting to think about what Pupitars, like what are the pre-evolutions available? I didn't really look at it earlier. I mentioned Drillbur having an interesting ability. This Pupitar has a really good ability. This is basically Sonic Slip on a stage 1 middle evolution. So you can stall your opponent if they're beating you down and you're trying to get up to your stage 2. You slap down this Pupitar and you get that instant Sonic Slip where your opponent now has to gust or escape rope to try and get a knockout. Otherwise, they're not doing any damage to you. Now, this is a card that was mentioned where some people were saying that house rules should include that you don't allow off-type Pokemon that have abilities, and I think that makes sense. If that were the case, we've got a couple other Pupitars that are interesting to look at for this. Again, this is for playing Tyranitar in Darkness. This Pupitar has Rocket Evolution. It's kind of like Ascension. It costs 3 energy, but you could power it up with an Ignition Energy or a Triple Acceleration, and then you go straight up into the Tyranitar. And so really good with that item lock. You evolve it. You get to, you have Larvitar, you evolve it into Pupitar, you put the energy and you go Rocket Evolution, and boom, you've got the item lock on going. But there's also this one, which would be funny in like a dark spread deck. It does 20 damage to each bench Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's, for 1 energy. So decent spread damage there, and then you can use that with I think it's an Eevee that does like 20 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon that have damage counters on them. So that is an option that you can see in Darkness Spread. Single Strike Urshifu. Now the interesting thing about Dark is it had the Zoroark that has the ability that you can get any stage 1 Darkness Pokemon out of your discard pile and replace it and put it onto your bench. So that was a way for Dark to kind of cheat when it has stuff like this Urshifu, which can only evolve from Cubfu, which is only a fighting Pokemon. It didn't work for Tyranitar because T-Tar doesn't have a stage 1 Darkness Pokemon because Pupitar is only Rock and Ground. But you would be able to play this Urshifu, which is pretty good. If it has a damage counter on it, 3 energy for 200 damage. Very easy to meet that condition with Toxtricity. Also gets to use that Single Strike energy, which I believe boosts its damage by 20. So it's actually, if you can get a Single Strike energy on it, it's doing 220 for 3 energy. And you can use this with the Houndoom. I've seen decks that use the Houndoom and this and the Single Strike energy, and there's like multiple ways to get that Single Strike energy back into the deck. Without having to use a Zoroark to get this out, I think that deck becomes a lot better for sure. Crawdaunt has a couple of interesting options that can only evolve from the water type Corphish. We've got the Cutting Riposte, does 130 damage for 1 Darkness Energy if it has damage on it, which again, Toxtricity helps fill that very easily, or Rainbow Energy. There's also this Crawdaunt where if you evolve it, you can discard an enemy from your opponent's active Pokemon, an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. Could be really good in Darkness Control. I know there is a Dark Control deck that was doing really well, and straight up energy removal on a stick seems really good in a control deck, so that would be possible. This Galarian Slowbro is interesting where it does 3 energy and it has a special condition. It's hitting for 220, so similar to the Urshifu. Very easy to poison yourself in Dark. You've got what's her name, Janine's special technique supporter card, and you've got the Brute Bonnet with the ability, if you put the Ancient Tool on it, you can poison both Pokemon. So very easy to poison yourself in Dark. I don't know, it's kind of gimmicky, but it is a interesting attacker for those self-poisoning decks, which could also use Dark Mochi, so you could be hitting for like 280 with this thing. There's a Darkness Greninja, which I thought was funny. It has the same attack as that new Inteleon that came out, where it knocks out the Pokemon with the lowest HP. Could knock out your Pokemon though, and it also does 70 for 2 energy. I don't think it's great, probably not worth playing, although Frogadier has a good ability where you put it down and it does 3 damage counters. So could maybe see play for that. I should mention, I don't think I mentioned this, that the rule would be you have to have the final evolution to be able to play the off-type pre-evolutions, right? So I think I kind of said that, where the final evolution, your final Pokemon in the evolution chain has to be the same type. So you couldn't just have Frogadier water type and no Greninja in your darkness deck. And then there's a Cacturne that only evolves from Cacnea. I think this card's probably terrible. Derail, there's much easier ways to do that. Oh yeah, worth mentioning the Nidorino lines. There's a Nidoking and Nidoqueen in dark, and there's a couple of Nidorinos in Psychic and Darkness, I believe. There's one fighting Nidoking, but there's no fighting Nidoqueen. But if you were playing Nidoqueen in dark, you can play this Nidoran, which has a call for family attack, so that's nice. Pangoro, really a mid stage 1 attacker that only evolves from, I believe, the fighting type Pancham. This one's decent. It does 200 damage for 3 energy if... Oh, your bench Pancham. Never mind. That one's actually useless, so ignore the one on the right. The power tackle is kind of the best you get. 3 energy for 160. And it's very mid for a stage 1. Shiftry is okay, not really worth mentioning. I know the Giant Fan Shiftry kind of terrorized, I think, the standard format or maybe the expanded format for a while with Forest of Giant Plants, so kind of worth mentioning that one, but I don't see it being relevant with Forest of Giant Plants being banned, of course. And that moves us into Fairy type, and Fairy type, again, as I mentioned, very exciting. You can get some new cards from this. Doesn't get much though. We do get Alolan Ninetales in Fairy type, which has that rubbish Blizzard attack. Unfortunately, 10 damage modifier is terrible for each tool card in your discard pile, so like I feel like the most you could get is maybe like 80 damage off of this if you really go to town. But the really exciting thing about having Alolan Ninetales is you get access to Alolan Vulpix from Water. And Alolan Vulpix doesn't only search for water Pokemon, it can search for any 2 Pokemon. So I feel like that could be an interesting get for Fairy decks, in addition to that Sylveon for Fairy control. Now, Lightning also, aside from the Jolteon, doesn't have much, but this Strong Charge Vikavolt is really interesting. You know, being able to get 2 energy from the deck is really strong. Basically like Rillaboom. It has to be a Grass and a Lightning, so you get into kind of the weird deck building stuff with having 2 energy types. And there's also already a Stage 2 Magnezone that has a Rain Dance ability, so Lightning already has a Stage 2 Energy Accelerator. But again, much more powerful getting energy from the deck than having to dump them from the hand. So I feel like this is a really interesting possibility for Lightning if we're to get this. There's also a Vikavolt that has the ability for 4 energy to do 200 snipe damage, which can be really strong. You do have to discard 2 lightning energy. But if you play this one, and if you manage to rare candy it up from whatever Charjabug evolves from, then if you have Charjabug in your hand, there's actually a cool Charjabug where you can attach this Charjabug to your Vikavolt. Oh, it's as a special energy card. I wonder if that uses up your energy for turn. Because I was thinking you could go like Vikavolt attach. Maybe you could go Vikavolt attach from turn, Dynamotor, and then attach this Charjabug, and then you've got the 4 energy you need. I don't know if this actually uses up your energy for turn. Let me know in the comments if you know. Does Charjabug's battery ability count as attaching an energy from hand? But I thought that was cool that if you could rare candy it, you could attach Charjabug to its own evolution. And then Dragon. And then we have Dragon, which has a lot of cool options should we get this rule change. Altaria with the Tempting Tune. It's kind of like a Fast Call Dragonite on a stage 1. But it does put this order on top of your deck. So you'll have to have something like Dracloak to fish it out of the deck. But I feel like Altaria plus Dracloak would be a really powerful little search engine. Very similar to like Magcargo plus Rapidash, right? For not having to use stage 2 line would be very appealing. There's also this Altaria, which I think would be really good too, especially in like Dragobox decks even, maybe. You know, giving all your dragons 20 more damage can really fix some math. A lot of dragons are notoriously stuck dealing 160, which gives them a hard time against things like that have 180 HP. Also gives your Rayquazas a little more oomph. Just kind of gives all of your attackers just a little bit more. So I don't know, I'd have to look at the math, but I feel like this is an interesting Altaria. There's also some Flygons that'll be really interesting. Specifically, I feel like the Sand Flap that lets you choose you or your opponent to shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 4 cards. Like, that is a serious draw engine / disruption engine. We've seen Kingdra with that ability in water being used by people, mostly in rogue decks. But I feel like that could be a really interesting draw engine for Dragon that has otherwise relied on like Dragonite as a stage 2 to get you what you need. Now you wouldn't be able to have to use a supporter. There's also a Flygon that has sort of a Sandstorm ability, that like the one we've seen on Team Rocket's Tyranitar. So if you want to play Dragon Spread with the Noivern, that's a thing I've seen people try to do, is Dragon Spread. There's also this Flygon, which gives all of your Dragon Pokemon that like thick, fat, unaware ability that Snorlax has. Don't think it's really worth it on a stage 2, but thought it was worth mentioning. Also, you would have access to fighting type Prevos for that Flygon, and there is a Vibrava that does 10 spread for 1 fighting energy. So that would be very useful in a Dragon Spread deck if you were trying to do something like that. And there's a Trapinch with an awesome Call for Family that gets 2 basic Pokemon that would be unlocked in Dragon. So that would be really cool. Mentioning the Alolan Exegutors, they're not very good. I think this one does, if you have 5 energies in your discard pile, different basic energy types, it does 120 for 1 grass. And then this one, for 0 energy, you can draw cards until you have 6 cards in your hand. Now the reason I'm mentioning these is because you would get access to Execute, and Propagation Execute is an insane card. It's so broken, and there's so many ways to use it in Dragon. I mean, Guzman Hala is a staple in Dragon. Plus you've got Mysterious Treasure, Ultra Ball if you're playing it, Quick Ball, plenty of ways to get value out of this Execute in a Dragon deck, but you'd be playing kind of a bad Executor. And then we've got Kingdra. I think there's one that really matters here, the Ancient Trait one. Actually has pretty decent damage for an Ancient Trait Pokemon, which can accelerate energy to itself, which is pretty good. But you do have to discard 2 energy from it. So 150 damage for 3, and you have to discard 2 energy. Okay for stage 2, not really any good stage 1s or basics to evolve from. But speaking of Dragon Spread, this other Kingdra is actually kind of interesting. Tri-Bullet doing 30 damage to 3 of your opponent's Pokemon. So for 1 water, you're basically spreading 30 damage 3 ways. And you can do 20 damage times the number of water and lightning energies in your discard pile, and you shuffle them into the deck. Probably not worth it for that attack, but the Tri-Bullet is certainly interesting. There's also Dragalge, but not very good. It's kind of poison based, and it's not very good at doing that. And Dragon's not really about poison. Now moving into fire, there's only a couple things. Talonflame is really interesting. There's one that does 160 for 1 energy if it has damage counters on it. Goes very well with a specific fire aggro archetype that uses Moltres with the Rainbow Wing, and the Centiskorch that does bench damage to yourself. There's also one that does 160 for 1 if the opponent's Pokemon is damaged. Not really that great. There's one that burns the opponent, and there's one that does 100 damage to the active and 50 damage to the bench for 2 energy. And that one's also really interesting to me because, again, damage splitting is prize splitting, so you can get multiple prizes with that. Probably the best one's going to be the Fiery Breeze, though, that goes with the self-damaging, but some interesting options with Talonflame. There's an Alolan Marowak that's fire type only that evolves from the fighting type Cubone, but they're not good, unfortunately. You don't have enough Alolan Pokemon to really make these work, and the energy acceleration's not worth the attack. Alright, we talked about the Eevees. Alright, going back to water, Crabominable is playable if you let water have a fighting type Crabrawler. Haymaker for 250. If you play Kofu, it's 250 for 4 energy. Don't know if that's really worth it. I think Wailord has you kind of outmatched there in terms of energy to damage ratio, but it's worth mentioning. Now here's the one that we're going to go into fighting now, and here's the one that people have been really objecting to for this rule change is Gallade. This Gallade's okay. It's actually kind of bad. For 2 colorless energy, it does 130 if you've played a supporter, and it also lets you rearrange. Once per turn, you can rearrange the top 5 cards and put them back on top. You can't put them on bottom, so it's not Scry 5. You're stuck with whatever those top 5 cards are, but can be pretty good to like fix your Lunatone draw and then shuffle whatever the rest are away. Now, the reason that this is getting people talking is because being a fighting type, you would then give fighting access to Kirlia. And right now, fighting is kind of super powerful, and that's because they have access to Lunatone, which is probably the best draw engine in the game on an ability, and that's on a basic. So now you're thinking you give them that and Kirlia, they're going to be drawing 5 cards every turn, discarding 2. Yeah, I get it, but honestly, fighting's bench is getting really crowded right now, and I don't even know if they would play this, assuming they have to play this Gallade as well. Like, that takes up a spot in the deck. That's kind of a dead card for a lot of the game, especially if you want to just keep this Kirlia out. You probably don't even want to evolve it. But I see the argument. I think if this rule were to be tested, it would be worth testing it, allowing this, and then maybe coming back and being like, okay, let's put in without no abilities allowed on Prevolutions. There's another issue though, and getting rid of abilities on Prevolutions doesn't fix this one. We've got a fighting type Diggersby. It's got a mill attack. There's a couple other fighting type Diggersby. They have mediocre damaging attacks. I put this one because it's more mill focused, and which could be control based. And that gives fighting access to the Omega Barrage Bunnelby, which previously, well, I guess fighting did have Metacham as their barrage, but now it's going to have access to barrage on a basic. So that would be interesting. I think that's the other big one for fighting. Gastrodon, you know, Sticky Bind, bench stage 2 Pokemon have no abilities if Gastrodon's on the bench. This one seems really mid to me. I know people thought that would be a good one, but it's like all your opponent has to do is put a Floatstone on their stage 2 ability engine. They pivot it up, they use the ability, and they send it back. Or they Boss's Orders your Gastrodon. Now they can use all their abilities before they knock it out. It's like, I don't know. It seems okay. Also, the fact that it only hits stage 2s, so your opponents, like the best decks have stage 1 abilities that they're using, not stage 2s. You know, Psychics on Xatu and Malamar, and Metals on Bronzong and Metang, so it would do nothing against those decks. But that would become available. This Seismitoad's fun. It's got Smooth Over on a stage 2. And then for 4 energy, it does some damage. Yeah, I think you're just playing this as the Smooth Over. Honestly, this card would have been relevant a year ago, before Mega Evolution came out. I think now with Lunatone, there's no reason to bother with this Seismitoad, but it would become playable with this rule, so that's interesting. You got Poliwrath, which does some damage and loops some energy back to hand. It's okay, it's kind of mediocre. Infernape does burn stuff. Fighting doesn't really do burn, so not that great. There's a Breloom, it needs grass energy. Cleavor, Torterra, that's pretty bad. And some Wormadams. And so that moves us into Psychic, and this is the big one for Psychic. And I actually think this one is probably the one that would need to be banned. This Shedinja, because it says once during your turn, you can discard all cards attached to this Pokemon and attach it to one of your Pokemon as a tool card. And when the Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out, your opponent takes 1 fewer prize cards. That seems kind of broken for a Pokemon ability, especially when you can then just like bring it all back to hand and play it again. Like, you can easily loop this card, and I feel like I'm not understanding how this works or something, because it seems like it's just a Lily's Pearl that you can put on anything that you can recur and loop. So this one seems like it's broken and probably would need to get banned, but I think you should try with it. Wheezing becomes interesting. This Wheezing was already playable. It's kind of a neat spread Wheezing thing, and the reason this becomes interesting is because this gains access to the Ascension Coughing from the Dark type, and kind of neat that you could cheat this Wheezing out on turn 2 or turn 1 going second and suddenly start spamming damage counters on your opponent. And then finally, we've got a Weirdeer, which has a draw 1 ability on a stage 1, and it has the same effect as Iron Boulder for its attack, 2 colorless energy, but it only does 120 instead of 170. So don't think this would see a whole lot of play Psychic's already got a ton of draw on abilities without playing this. So I'm pretty sure that's everything. I tried to go through it really fast because there's a lot of cards, but let me know what you guys think. What do you guys think about the Eevee rule? Oh, I skipped a bunch. Sorry. Orbeetle, Evilmancy. This one's cool. For each energy, you can bring out a stage 2 Pokemon from your deck and just put it straight on the bench. So that's kind of nuts. You could get out Gallade and Gardevoir in the same deck at the same time. That's kind of crazy for a stage 2. It's fun. Alolan Marowak, bad Retaliate. Spirit Smash, bad. Okay, and this one. Rabsca lets you put a Pokemon from your discard pile onto your bench. That's kind of neat, but kind of a gimmick. There's a bunch of Starmies that are bad, that are only in Psychic. Okay, so that's it. So let me know what you guys think about this proposed rule change that Andrew Mahone has been talking about, bringing in off-type evolutions. Do you guys think this would be good for the format? Do you think this would be bad? Do you think that GLC would lose its identity, or types would lose their identity if you're allowing things like Metal to bring in Grass-type Scyther for Scizor, or Fighting type to have Kirlia, or Dark types to have Pupitar? I'm really curious what you guys think, what the community's thinking. I've seen people arguing about it in Discord. I have thoughts. I think it would be kind of cool to try out. I actually think it would really open up things for the community in terms of like bringing more people into the format because more Pokemon are playable. It just kind of sucks that right now there's like this big inadvertent ban list of Pokemon that are kind of iconic and awesome and people really like them, but you can't use them in GLC because they don't work with the monotype rule. Anyway, like and subscribe to the video. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you for the next one. Bye.